What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Jenks Island podcast, the only NFL podcast we get your take from a washed-up Division III cornerback. I'm your host, Quinshon Judkins, joined again by my good friend Ty McGee. And in today's episode, we're going to be breaking down our top running backs for this year's draft class. It's a loaded draft class. I could see personally like 15 to possibly 20 guys going in the top 5 rounds of this draft. It's going to be a really fun class to break down, as well as just seeing where these guys end up, seeing how their careers play out as well. So getting right into it, we're going to start off with our lists, and then Ty has a good tiers graphic that we're going to pull up as well. And then we'll be breaking down each guy individually after we give our lists. So starting off, Ty, I'll let you go first with your tiers real quick. We got this cool graphic here. Why don't you go through it and break it down for the listeners?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a different strategy here, just because some of these guys I think are, really hard to separate between, 3 through 5 and then beyond that. So at the 1 and the 2, I have my bell cow backs. I think watching Omarion Hampton, we'll talk about him. I think he's a lot closer to Ashton Jeanty than I initially thought. And then in my RB1s, I have Quinshon Judkins, Kaleb Johnson, TreVeyon Henderson. I think all those guys will be probably early day two guys that come in and will be RB1s for a lot of whoever drafts them. They have a lot of elite traits, but just kind of are a step below Hampton and Jeanty, who are day one guys. My next set of guys are the committee backs. I think Sampson, Devin Neal, Skattebo, and Damian Martinez are all guys that could come in, compete for a job, but most likely be a part of a committee. They have different skill sets that, they really excel, like Skattebo as a power back, or Sampson in quickness, but they don't have the, all-around traits that you look for as an RB1 or like the bell cow guys do. And then finally, my depth pieces. I have Jordan James, Brashard Smith, Lequint Allen, RJ Harvey, and DJ Giddens. It's kind of similar to the committee backs. I think, they all kind of excel at one thing or the other, but they're not as, elite at some of those things. I think DJ Giddens, for example, he's a good power back, but Skattebo, I think, is a level above him in that. So, I think my top 8 would probably be the bell cows, the RB1s, the committee backs, minus Damian Martinez. But I think this is a much easier way to separate these guys out for me, because I just think, there's not as much that separates each guy within each tier.
Yeah. I think for the running backs too, like you said, even there's such a little bit of a divider between some of these later guys. After like those top 2, top 5 guys, then you see a little bit of a drop off, and kind of it's going to be up to what different people prefer, or different teams prefer for those sort of guys. And so we could see all those guys going in a different order on big boards across the league. So my top 8 is going to be a little bit different. I'm probably going to get some heat for it, but I got Lequint Allen at number 8. I got Quinshon Judkins at 7. RJ Harvey, who's like my big draft crush for the later rounds in this draft, at number 6. Dylan Sampson at 5. Kaleb Johnson at 4. TreVeyon Henderson at 3. And then Omarion Hampton and Ashton Jeanty and at 2 and 1 respectively. So Ty, I'll let you go first, sort of breaking down your number 8. I think you had Skattebo at number 8, right?
Yeah, Skattebo at number 8. I think he's a bbig back. Sacramento State transfer too, so it's nice to see a smaller school guy kind of hold up really well against the better talent, especially in the college football playoffs. He had a hell of a game against Texas. I think he was sick, and he was just putting all of his effort into that game. But obviously a big, powerful back, really good balance. And despite being a big guy, that's a bruiser. He's got really good patience too. And he's a good pass catcher, despite, being a bigger guy too, right? That Arizona State offense kind of used him in every facet of the game. He even threw a touchdown in that Texas game. So, really versatile back. He's got good vision, and he does have the ability to make, multiple cuts, but I think that's in smaller doses, because I do think he's a stiffer guy. He doesn't have the most elite athletic traits, right? 4.62 guy. Fumbles were a problem. Ball security, you want that. That's why I think he's more of a committee type of guy for me, because, when you think about your RB1, you don't want, you got to hang on to the ball, right? That's the name of the game. Pass blocking wise too, he's not going to be an efficient 3-down guy, because while he can catch the ball, he's not the most technically sound pass blocker. And I think sometimes too, he just starts to get too creative behind the line, dances a little bit too much. Sometimes he's got to put his head down and be the power back that he is. I think, he does try to be a little creative at times and bounce things, and it works for him, right? Because he's big and can shove guys up. But at the next level, you're playing against bigger, faster dudes. So will that be able to translate? So for me, he's probably like a round 3 to 4 type of guy in that tier 3 for me and the committee backs.
Yeah, I definitely got to agree with the round 3 to 4 valuation for him. And I think it comes down to also on top of like his size, things like that. I think his acceleration is just really kind of not what you want in a guy that you want as like a top running back in your running back room. And I think there's also some issues like or concerns with his his ability to have a long-term career basically, because I think he took a lot of hits in college, right? And he's one of the older guys coming in this class and going into the NFL career, right? You want a guy that is a little bit less used in college, younger, things like that, fresher legs. So him having a lot of contact already going into his NFL career, it gives some concerns about how the longevity that he could play in the NFL.
Yeah, for sure. He kind of reminds me of like a Toby Gerhart, right? Like Toby Gerhart was a big, strong back for Stanford, but had a lot of miles on him coming out of college, and had a decent NFL career. Was kind of a committee back, but wasn't ever anything that he was in college.
Yeah, and just another thing to like point out, like that could possibly bump him up some teams' draft boards would be just the passion that he brings to like the game. Like you could see it in the playoff game, and then also like building up to that. Like he plays with a lot of passion, plays with his heart out on the line every single play. So that could drive him up some boards as well. My number 8 is going to be Lequint Allen. I talked about him earlier. So I think for me, the reason why I have him number 8 and on this list is because he's the best receiving back in this class, in my opinion. He had, I think he had like 64 receptions, which led the whole FBS for running backs. He's a former receiver in high school, came into college, transferred to running back, and he could play out of the slot as well. You could have him run routes out of the slot. He has good polished routes. He knows kind of the nuances of being a receiver, knows how to make guys think he's going one way and go the other and get some separation. I think the biggest pros for me outside of his receiving would be that I think he has also blocks with great effort. If you want him to be a 3-down back in the NFL, he could be an immediate impact there. He has solid tempo when getting from the backfield to the second level, and he's able to make guys miss and bounce off tacklers. The only cons of them on top of that are that he lacks that home run speed that you kind of want. He ran like a 4.5, 8.40, something like that. And then he's not the most powerful back. You'll see him bounce off of tacklers and go sideways off the hits and bounce off and keep running, but he won't go forward through contact, which is something that a lot of NFL teams are going to want to look for. But yeah, so I don't know if you have anything to add, Ty. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of like a Lynn Bowden Jr., right? Lynn Bowden played a little bit of receiver and running back, and he was even a quarterback in college too. And, Lequint, like I think he's a really good pass catcher. You could play him in the slot, right? Like you can use him as a chess piece, but for me, more of just like a depth chess piece, right? Where, you bring him in at times to be a receiving back, but I don't think, like you said, doesn't have the home run speed. And he's just not the, most, he just doesn't, when he's out there, he does well and he catches the ball, but I don't think he's like the most elite athlete. So I think that kind of knocked him out.
I think that's fair. And another thing I wanted to highlight is his age as well. He's 20, one of the younger guys in this class. So NFL teams may see that and bump him up some draft boards as well. And at number 7, Ty, I believed you had Devin. Was it Devin Neal at number 7 for you, or
Dylan Sampson?
Dylan Sampson.
Yeah,
okay.
Dylan Sampson at number 7. Smaller guy, really small guy at 5'11", but runs really fast, 4.35. So he's an elite athlete, very, very quick. Good balance. I think that the thing that popped for me the most on tape was his spin move. He's got a lethal spin move. Uber quick in short areas, right? That lateral quickness and that ability to shift in space is there. Surprisingly, for a smaller guy, he's got good pop in his pass pro, which, I'll talk a little bit more about where he needs to grow in pass pro. But, for a smaller guy, you want to see that, right? At least put the effort in, have some pop. And to go along with his lateral quickness, he's got good vision, right? So, he's got everything in short space that you'd want out of him. But again, undersized. Some more ball security concerns, right? That's why, again, I have him as a committee back, right? Those types of guys aren't going to be your RB1s if they're fumbling the ball a lot. Not the most experienced receiver. I think he only had 39 catches in college, which a quick guy you want to see more at, in the pass game from him, kind of like a Lequint Allen. Sometimes he bounces things too often, right? He is a shifty, fast guy, but he's small, so he's gonna not be willing to grind that inside, so he bounces things outside. Sometimes you just want to hit him, especially in like a zone run system. You want to see him hit those holes, maybe one cutting up. And then I think just in pass pro, his vision needs work, right? I said he has good pop, but he's just not great at identifying loops and twists and stuff like that and finding work. Which is almost the bigger part of it all, right? Like as a running back, we want you to be able to find the linebacker or the corner or whoever it may be that's looping and at least get a body on him, right? Like if you have a pop, that's great, but you at least got to find the guys, because if you have a guy coming off the blind side and strip sack on your quarterback, that's a recipe for disaster. So I think the upside is there with him, right? Because he does have the elite athleticism. And if he can just develop a more refined route tree and get rid of those ball security concerns, just you would think of him as a three down guy, at least a third down back, right? Like a receiving back with the elite athleticism, but he just doesn't have the blocking ability or the route running ability. So it's kind of, he goes against the what you would normally think for a guy his size and his speed.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm glad you brought up his lack of route running, because in college, like Tennessee did not ask him, "Hey, go run some routes," things like that, which really made no sense at all for his size, speed, agility, like you said. And then as a pass blocker, he had a 38% pressure rate when pass blocking, which is just absurd when you're a running back that you're coming to the NFL. A team can't rely on you at all, especially against college talent. Now you want to go against NFL linebackers and linemen. It's not going to work out for that. And like you said, I think just his speed and quickness really could make him a really dangerous threat in the NFL if he goes to the right team. And another thing to highlight, only 20 years old, like some of the other guys. A younger guy could coach up the ball security thing. That can be coached up pretty quickly. So I'd like to see him go to a good match. But I could see him getting drafted as high as second round, maybe mid to late second round, which is I think would be appropriate based on his speed and agility. But like you said, it could be a risk for some of these teams.
Yeah, I could see round 2. I think I had him more as like a probably early round 3, but could slide around 4, just depending on, how teams see, right, the pressure rate and the, lack of route running in college. But the athleticism, some team will take him probably high third round, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's definitely fair. I have him definitely probably like mid in the middle of the second round to mid third round is kind of that range I see him falling to. My number 7, I think your number 4 is going to be Quinshon Judkins. So I'm a little bit lower on him than a lot of other people, and I have no clue really why. I think a lot of it is these guys above him I think have more potential in different areas, but Quinshon Judkins, for some reason in his Ole Miss tape, Ty made me watch him his Ole Miss tape, which I don't know how I didn't do before. I talked to Ty about it, but when I'm watching his Ohio State tape, he looked a lot slower to me, or at least his footwork looked a lot slower to me than his Ole Miss tape. And I don't know if that was him adding weight, which I don't think it was, but that's for some reason that dropped him a little bit on my board. But I think his pros to me are his ability to burst through the line and take on hits. He's able to bounce off guys and keep moving. I like his patience that he waits and he waits for the plays to develop. And his ability to take off after the cut. His acceleration is pretty good, but his top end speed isn't necessarily like the top high end of the guys in this class. And I like his pass blocking as well. That's something that a lot of these teams are going to look for, and that's going to bump him up some draft boards. Cons, I think he's overly patient at times, and he's a one cut back. I don't see him being very elusive like Dylan Sampson. He's not nearly as elusive as him, but he is more powerful than him in the run game. Really just my notes are for him was that I think he'll be more of a community backfield kind of guy. I don't think he's a bell cow by any means, but I think he'll be a solid running back for whatever team picks him in this draft. He's going to be, like we just said for Dylan Sampson, I see him being in the second round, third round kind of guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, right, I think, the pass blocking, that is a huge, huge thing that, we haven't seen as much with some of the backs that we've talked about already. So that's, kind of why I had him so high on my board. And the ball security, right? Like those two things we just haven't seen with some of these backs. He has elite ball security. You see him on tape, he's always high and tight, runs really well. I think he's got a good burst, off the handoff, off the rip on those first 10 yards. He's just not the fastest guy, right? I mean, still ran a 4.48, not too far behind TreVeyon Henderson, his teammate, too. So, maybe just game speed is not quite there. But I think he has elite lateral quickness, right? If you turn the Ole Miss tape left to right, I mean, the dude is really quick. He's a patient runner. He gets really skinny in those tight areas, and he can take a blow. He's got really good balance, and he's got good hands, too. So, for me, that's just similar to you, like the weaknesses are, not the fastest guy. He is a one-cut guy. He's got like tighter hips. And he can't just be too patient at times. But man, when he hits a hole and he's in space, he's very quick laterally. I think, this is the start of guys that, that I would love to see in Denver. I think Judkins would just be a lot better of a fit for Denver than Javonte Williams was last year because, he's just willing to he's got more burst than I think Javonte had, and I think more quickness in space, and just kind of more willing to hit the hole sometimes. Right? I said he's patient, but he's patient in a good way. I think he hits the hole. So this is like Denver in the second round is where I would really like to see him, and he's a bigger guy too, right? 6'2", 19. Not the biggest back, but still a big enough back, and so yeah.
Yeah, no, I think he definitely has basically everything at the NFL team, like size wise. Like if you're gonna look at that and he's quick as he is, like that's definitely a solid pick in the second round for the Broncos, especially. Your number 6 is your number 6, Devin Neal. I like the
Yeah.
tiers for some. Yeah. Okay, you're 6 number Devin Neal. I want to hear you break him down because I didn't have him on my list, but I do have him. He's like in that 9-10 range for me at running back.
Yeah, I think the 40 time, was a little bit deceiving for him, right? 4.58, but on film, I think he's the opposite of Judkins here. He's got that game speed, right? Super duper explosive, really good vision and burst. In my notes, I had better game speed than combine speed, right? Because I think you just turn on some of the film, and sometimes he makes one cut and he's gone, right? He's got that home run ability in games, and it's so shifty in space, right? Like I said, it's one cut and he's gone. Just some of the cons with him, though. He does run high, doesn't have the best hands either, and not really, a great pass blocker, and he makes some erratic cuts at times. But I think as just a pure back, right, this is not going to be a third down back for me, right? I think that's why he's a committee guy. He'll come in, he'll be explosive, and I think his explosiveness shows up a little bit more on tape for me than Sampson's did. Like Sampson was and it made sense for him, right? He's a smaller guy. He was quick. I think Neal is just shiftier. I'll say that. I think maybe a similar explosion, but he's just a shiftier guy. I see him probably in round 3 to 4. He's just a good back that's going to get you yards, right? He produced at Kansas every single year there. And I think he's the type of committee back that you have on first or second down, and then you bring in a Lequint Allen on third down, or if you're in short yardage, you bring in a Cam Skattebo. Neal is not going to be excelling really at any one thing. He's just a good back that runs hard and he's very quick in space.
Yeah, I had him a little bit lower just because I think I like his needs to improve in the pass pro, and then his speed, things like that dropped him down a little bit. But like I really want to highlight, I think the guys from anywhere from like 6 to like 15, I think could be interchangeable depending on what teams or you personally look for. So a lot of these guys are going to be interchangeable, and I think they're all really, really talented because this is a really deep class. My number 6 is going to be RJ Harvey, a really, really big draft crush for me because he is going to be a little bit older, right? He's 24 years old. That will scare a lot of people, but I think he is the definition of what could be a bell cow back in the NFL if he goes to the right team. And the reasoning behind that is he's a human teleportation device. And what I mean by that is his lateral quickness. Like there were a couple of times I'm watching his tape, I'm like, God damn, like he cut 3 yards and was still at top speed almost. It seemed like his speed didn't go down at all. Another thing is his acceleration. He goes from 0 to 100 really quick. He does a great job of making guys miss in close proximity, or what a lot of NFL guys call the phone booth, whatever you want to call it. He has great patience behind the line of scrimmage. And then he's a solid route runner with ability to be explosive as a pass catcher. I think after the catch, he could be a guy that makes a lot of guys miss, things like that. And you're in a 4.4 flat 40, which a lot of teams are going to like as well. My cons for him are that he's not a pass blocker at this time. I think that his size, he's like 5'8", 205. I think that could possibly hurt that a little bit, obviously. And he is a little bit older. That's going to be some wear on his tires. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of teams are going to take that as a notch and bump him down a little bit on their boards because he's a little bit older and has that wear and tear. But 22 touchdowns, 1,578 yards, like that's the production you want to see. And he did it for 2 straight years. So I think he could be a guy that is taken in a later round. He could be a 4th, 5th round guy because of his age that could have a really, really good start to his career. So I'm excited to see where he lands. Ty, what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I had him in my depth pieces, right? I think the knocks for me are very similar, right? It's the size and the age. But any one of those depth pieces, I will say this, right? Like, and we kind of talked about this offline, like any of those guys that you're going to take in the later rounds, right? 4th, 5th, 6th round, like those are guys that, in the right situation could pop and become committee guys or something like that, right? The production's been there within, especially last year was really, really successful at UCF. It's just, how long can he keep that up for? That's why he's more of a depth piece for me, right? I think, I did have Skattebo, who's a bit of an older guy on there, but, he's just, I think he brings an elite trait, whereas I think Harvey's just a good back, right? Some of these guys, none, except for my top 2 tiers, I don't think any of these guys are 3-down backs, right? I think a lot of them excel at what they excel at, and they don't bring much else to the table outside of that. So that's why he was more of a depth piece for me.
No, I think that's 100% a fair take because, like you said, he's not necessarily like a elite guy. Like he's not an elite guy. He's not going to be able to break through a lot of tackles. Like he's not going to truck people, things like that. So I think that could be something that drops him as well. Like he's an exceller at going side to side, being quick, and things like that. So I see where you're going. I see where you're coming from with that. Your number 5, I believe, was Kaleb Johnson. He's my number 4. So what are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, Kaleb Johnson, like we kind of talked about this a little bit before too. He's not creative. He's not, he's not the most elite athlete, but he just gets it done, right? Like for me, 6 foot, 225, bigger back, right? 4'5'7", 40, not the most elite speed, but he's got really good vision and balance. Like guys just bounce off of him. And he, I think for me too, like what separated the top 5 backs for me was not only their 3-down ability, but it was their elite balance, right? The ability to break tackles, stay on your feet. Like turn on the film with all these guys, you see them getting hit in the thigh boards and they're still, kind of bend and be, able to regain their balance. I think he's a really effective pass catcher. He just needs a little bit more refinement in his route tree. I think that's a lot of these guys too. I don't think any of them are, elite route runners. I think they just have really good soft hands for me. He's got really good burst off the handoff, right? Like those first 10 yards, it's very similar to Quinshon. That's why it was so hard for me to separate those guys in that second tier. Like they're strong off the handoff. It's just they don't have the home run speed, right? And I think he's patient too. That Iowa offense, right? It's a lot of grind and running. So he's slow read, and he hits that hole fast, and he'll get you at 15, 20 yards. He's just not gonna, he's not gonna be a home run guy. Like I said, not the most creative guy either, right? He's not juking you out. He's not have spin moves like Devin Neal or Sampson. So he just gets shit done, right? And I think if he can develop that route tree a little bit more and get a little bit stronger in pass pro, he'll be an RB1 for a team just because his size too. I mean, 6 foot 225. That's like a great frame for a back. You love to see that frame. So you could work with him. But I think I mean, and the production was there at Iowa, right? Like he was balling out and on a team that was god awful. So
yeah. No, and he is only 21 as well. So like we say, like he's a little bit younger. So the style of running back he is, he could last a little bit longer than guys like RJ Harvey or some of the other guys on this list. Yeah, for me, I think the big highlight for him was, I believe you mentioned it for Judkins as well as ball security. He had 0 fumbles in 2024, so I think that's a really big highlight for him. If you can trust a running back with his play style of just running into guys, not into guys, but you know what I mean, just getting forward and getting shit done, like you said, you can trust him not to drop the ball. That bumps him up a lot of draft boards. And a big con for me was that he's not the best pass blocker. So with his size, I think that's kind of, you should be able to trust a guy like him with his size to go in and block these sort of NFL talents in the league. And he's
I'll say
not.
this about the pass blocking though, right? Like
Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
not the most pass heavy team, right? So there's
Yeah,
not as much on tape with him
that's
with
true.
pass blocking, and I think a good running back coach can work with a guy like this with this
Mhm.
size to get him to there. It's just the style of offense isn't there.
Yeah, definitely a true point. Yeah, I could see. Yeah, 100% true. And another thing, like I think you mentioned his speed a little bit, and I don't think he was really he wasn't really asked to be a receiver in the Iowa offense, like you said there. That's not really what they do. So I would want to see him kind of develop that in the NFL if he can become a little bit more of a receiving back in the NFL and develop that, and he could be very, very solid in his career. And I think we said this before we started recording. I kind of comped him to Najee Harris just based on like how I'm watching. Like when I'm watching his tape, it kind of reminds me of he's just running, and he can make some guys miss, but he's just getting the job done. And I think
Yeah.
that's
I mean, think about
not a
Najee in
bad
the
thing.
pass game too, right? He's got soft hands. He's just not a crazy route runner, right? He'll catch
Yeah,
a swing and he'll catch a flat route and get 10 yards, So that's I think it's a great comp for Kaleb, right? They run very similarly, they play very similarly, and they're similar size.
exactly. And people would be like, why are you comparing him to Najee Harris? Like that's like he's not a good player. But like the thing is like we've talked about in the pod is Najee Harris his whole career has done nothing but get shit done. He's ran for 1,000 yards every single year, but people hate on him because he runs funny. He runs like he has jeans
Fourth
on.
most rushing yards since he entered the league, only behind Derrick Henry, Saquon, and Josh Jacobs, who all got big paydays last year. I know he
Exactly.
got that 1 year deal, $9 million, but he was a guy for me that I would like Denver to look into because I think he should have got a bigger payday than he did, a longer term payday too.
Yeah, I think especially for all the fantasy players out there, he definitely got a bump up in fantasy stock with going to the Chargers. With the role that they gave J.K. Dobbins last year, if you can get Najee Harris, this is a random tangent from what we're talking about draft wise, but he could be a really, really great fantasy pickup in a later round if he falls on some draft boards. Anyways, my number 3 is going to be TreVeyon Henderson out of Ohio State, a guy that is he had a little bit more of a role in the pass catching game for Ohio State. Obviously, like we already said, he did split reps with Quinshon Judkins. So something I want to see him do a little bit more is get more carries, things like that, and see how he holds up. 145 attempts last year. He's good in the pass protection. He's going to be a good weapon as a pass catcher. Like I already mentioned, that's kind of where they relied on him a little bit more than Quinshon on the team in Ohio State. And I love his athleticism and burst out of cuts. When you see him get the ball, he can quickly make a cut and just go. Like he just accelerates and he's gone. Some cons for him, I think he runs into traffic at times. I think he tries to be patient in the run and then ends up running into traffic. And then I haven't seen a lot from him in the run game, which is like I already mentioned, due to him being paired with Judkins. I want to see him more in a number 1 overall running back slot and see how he does, because I think he could be an RB1 for some of these NFL teams with the size and athleticism. I just want to see it actually on the field. What are your thoughts, Ty?
Yeah, he's my 3 too. And I think if you look beyond this year, right, his freshman year, he kind of burst onto the scene. He had a really good year. He kind of was their RB1. I think he had 1,200 yards. But the past, the years between his freshman year and senior year, a lot of durability concerns, missed a lot of time. I think, he will benefit from a team that has a really good strength and conditioning staff, but B,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a team that has an RB2 that can take a little bit of a load off of him, right? We really saw him thrive this year with Judkins there. For me, I think he's a dynamic receiver. He's got great explosion burst. That touchdown pass that he caught, I think it was in the national championship game, but he took it 75 yards. The guy's got home run speed, and it was one cut and he was gone. I think he's got really great vision, very patient. On that catch too, you saw he was a little shifty and elusive in space. I loved what I saw as a pass blocker and a lead blocker. Smaller guy, 5'10", 208, but he was absolutely popping dudes. In pass pro, against bigger guys, maybe that might pose a problem in the NFL, but, bring a linebacker at him, the dude was popping them. And on lead blocks for Will Howard on some of those QB powers, I mean, he was just getting out in space and leveling dudes. I would love to see him in Denver, lead blocking for Bo Nix on a little bit of a QB draw or something like that. It'd be really fun. My cons for him, again, the durability, right? He did get banged up the past 2 years. Probably some of that is because he's a smaller back and he does play physical at times. Similar to Sampson, I believe it was, he bounces runs, I think a lot. All these smaller, shifty guys, right? They do want to get out in space. And probably, again, part of it is, due to the durability stuff, right? He doesn't want to bang inside as much. He wants to be – he's a home run guy. And, as compared to some of the other guys, like his home run ability is elite. And I think, why I said he is a dynamic receiver, really good hands. His receiving ability is more about the yards after catch. I think he does need to develop that route tree a little bit more. For me, Kaleb, TreVeyon, Quinshon, I know I ranked them 3, 4, 5. They could go anywhere for me, right, in that range. Any one of them could be 3, anyone could be 4, anyone could be 5. I think they're all early day 2 guys. Denver's going to take one of them if they're there in the second, if we don't take Jeanty or Hampton in the first, in my opinion, because they're just all very dynamic guys that would, help elevate this offense and give us the running back that is a true RB1.
How many running backs would you have on the roster if you did take one? I honestly, I'm not familiar. I know.
Right now we have 4 technically, right? We have Jaleel McLaughlin, Aldrick Estime, Tyler Beatty, and one other one that's slipping my mind. But, some of those guys are cut candidates, right? Estime is the type of guy that could give Henderson a blow, right? A bigger back, could take some of those. And Jaleel McLaughlin too, shifty guy. I imagine those 2 stay on the roster. We draft a guy, and maybe Tyler Beatty stays on the roster because he showed some promise when he was healthy last year. But I think at least, Jaleel and Estime are safe because they are make less money, right? They've been around. They've been at least consistent enough. They were probably both our best backs last year. Like Javonte was terrible. So you add one of these guys in with him that are a bit younger. I'm being serious. He was awful. He was god awful. You add in one of these more dynamic backs in that RB1 or bell cow tier for me. It takes us to the next level, and they would play over Jaleel and Estime. Right? Estime didn't show us enough. I was high on him last year, but he had some ball security concerns and just didn't show us enough. And Jaleel is Jaleel McLaughlin. You get from him what you get from him, right? He's not a lead back. He's not a bad back. He's just pretty good back that, is shifty in space. But I think, any of those RB1s in round 2 for me would be a great pick.
Yeah. The reason I was laughing is because I remember you rant. I remember a few of your rants during the season for that. And also like predicting, like you were like, this week it's going to be this guy. And then like the guy like would get no attempts, right? So it was just like all over the place. That's why I asked if one of these guys.
The Twitter world was like 1 week Aldrick Estime is going to be a starter.
Yeah.
And Sean Payne himself was saying it. Aldrick Estime is going to get more carries. Guy had 4 carries the week that he said that. So, and Javonte Williams would have a 100-yard game and he'd come back the next week and he'd have 15 carries, 25 yards. And I was like, what the hell are we doing? So that's why I really need them to draft one of these top 5 guys for me.
Yeah. Sean Payton needs to find his new boom and zoom, find his 2 guys that he can use as a duo like he did with Kamara and Ingram.
Right. Take Henderson and Judkins. I said on Twitter, maybe last week, I would be a huge fan of taking one of the backs in the second round and trading back into the second round and getting the other one. I think you'd probably take Henderson first and then trade back in and get Judkins. I would love to have them back together. They obviously worked really well at Ohio State, and that kind of gives you that, not quite the thunder and lightning, but, Mark Ingram wasn't the biggest power guy. But for me, I could see some similarities to what they had with Ingram and Kamara.
Yeah, I could definitely see some similarities there. Moving on to our number 2, we both got the consensus 2 and 1, same guys. Omarion Hampton out of UNC as a guy that is quickly moving up my board and quickly moving up in the distance of the gap that I had between him and Ashton Jeanty. Reasoning is because his contact balance is something that I haven't really seen except for watching when I'm watching games with Alvin Kamara playing. The guy, he can take hits the hip, thigh, knee, and still just bounce off them and go for another 20 yards. The guy is ridiculous. And he can do anything you need. He can run, pass, protect, catch the ball. He can he's pretty solid in pass protection, and obviously running is good. He can catch the ball. He can do everything you need. Had 38 receptions last year on 373 yards. So he's a efficient and definitely reliable pass catcher. He'll be able to power his way to extra yards in the NFL. He did in college at a really, really good rate. And I think in the NFL, you'll see that decrease a little bit, but I think he'll still be able to do it. And his size/speed combo is perfect for the league, right? I think when you see a guy like 6 foot, 221 pounds, run a 4.4 640, and then be able to jump over guys like he does in college, it's really, really special. His cons for me are his agility and quick cutting ability need to be improved a little bit. I think obviously the weight is he's a little bit heavier, so he's going to be a little bit slower at that than some people, but I don't think it's that big of a con for him. I just kind of put it there because he didn't have a lot of cons. Another one would be stop jumping over guys. Like in college, you see him leaving his feet all the time, and he's just flying everywhere. And I get it. You're fighting for extra yards, things like that. But in the NFL, you take a couple extra hits from some of these guys, and you're going to be out of the league for in a couple of years after you're playing. And I think also you could get more injured, things like that. NFL coaches aren't going to want that from your number one running back. So just chill out with that a little bit, and you'll be all right. I think he's going to be a really, really good running back in the league. And something I noted for him, if the Saints want a running back round 1 and they don't want to pick him at 9, like if they don't want Jeanty at 9 and say maybe the Broncos want to trade up and get Tyler Warren at 9 or something like that, I could see them trading back to a little bit of a lower spot, getting Omarion Hampton, and then getting like a second round or whatever you would have to get for that, and then getting just more players from that. So I wouldn't mind that at all. But that's my thoughts. What are your thoughts on Ty?
Yeah, Hampton for me, like when we started the draft process, I was like, okay, he'll be there in round 2, right? He's quickly shot up the boards, like you said. Like, I think 20 is a sweet spot for him, right? Yep. Where Denver is. Minnesota could be an option there. I know they just got Jordan Mason, but in that 20s range is I think where Omarion Hampton ends up. Similar to Kaleb and TreVeyon and Quinshon, right? He's got that elite balance, but the difference between him and them is he is so damn powerful. I mean, like he gets hit in the thigh boards and he bounces back and then he runs a dude over, right? Like probably the most powerful runner next to Skattebo, but way more athletic than Skattebo, like you mentioned, right? 6'2", 4.4 640. I mean, that's a big dude running really fast. I think he's got really good vision and power and pass pro. That's like I talked about earlier, right? If you can find guys and deliver a blow, that's all you can ask for in pass pro, right? You got to be able to read the loops and the twists and all that stuff. I think he's effective as a pass catcher, right? Like all of these guys need to work on their route tree. They're not like, sick route runners besides Lequint Allen, but soft hands, really good as a pass catcher. Gets skinny in space, right? Kind of reminds me of Quinshon Judkins in space, like, or in those tight spaces, right? He can get skinny and kind of squeeze through, though, even though he's a power guy. And I just think he has elite burst, right? Like off the ball, he flies. The cons for me, like he can play high at times, and he gives guys like a bigger, board than they need, right? He's a 6 foot tall guy, right? Like he plays low most of the time, but I think probably as the game gets on, he gets a little bit more tired, and there's a bigger frame to hit him in. In pass pro, like, I think he's a physical guy, and, like I said, he finds guys and he meets them with power, but he's just not the most technically sound, right? And that's something that you can work on. A good running backs coach will teach him that. And he's not the most elusive, like home run type of guy, right? Like he does get hawked on some long runs. He's not really – he's a little bit more creative than Kaleb Johnson for me, but he's not gonna make you miss type of guy. He's a I'm gonna run you over type of guy, stiff arm you type of guy. So, between him and Jeanty, like the reason the gap is closing is because they are different backs, right? They both have really good yards after contact, but Hampton is the true power guy, while Jeanty, we'll get into him, is more of the elusive guy. So different backs, but very, very productive in college, and similar ability to just make guys miss and make, get those long runs. So round 1 guy, I would love him in Denver. Freak athlete. So.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, like you said, it's just we see that he is able to make guys like he's able to break tackles, things like that. But Ashton Jeanty, the true number one, can do it at a whole nother level. I'm trying to find the number of how many forced missed tackles he had. I'll find it here in a second. But I think when you look at Jeanty, you truly see a blue chip guy that's generational talent. He's 21 years old, and he's a guy that just came off of a season that was record breaking for him. Obviously, in the running side, he's not a big pass catcher. That wasn't really what was asked of him in Boise State, but he had 375 rushes. So that's obviously a lot of wear and tear, but I think he'll be able to be all right in the NFL. 2,600 yards and 29 touchdowns, which is just absurd. And production in the college level. Obviously, didn't win Heisman. I feel like he probably should have, but obviously, I see the reasoning for Travis Hunter. I'm not going to complain. I think it's perfectly fine. But I think Ashton Jeanty truly is the number one in all aspects of the game. He's dominant, and I would love to see if the Saints picked him. But I want to hear your thoughts, Ty. What are your big pros and cons for him while I try to find this missed tackle stats?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like he's a big back, right? Not the tallest guy, 5'9", but 215 at 5'9". He's almost as big as Omarion Hampton, and he's 3 inches shorter and runs that 4.42, so really quick. For me, the strengths, right? I think he's a smart pass blocker, finds work, very similar to Hampton, delivers a blow. His vision is insane. He sees things in lanes that aren't even open yet. His ability to one cut into lanes that, like I said, weren't open and now all of a sudden are, is elite, right? Like he in his own scheme, he's going to be insane as like a one cut, like outside zone, get up in, like that's the perfect scheme for him. The leg drive, I mean, is also elite, right? Like the vision of the leg drive, the balance. Like dude just runs his feet. He's always staying on his feet. He's never going down. Sometimes that can be a weakness for him. I think sometimes, you look at that Penn State game, fights a little bit too hard, right? Ball's getting popped out. I know he's trying to put the team on his back, but sometimes he's got to go down, right? I know he fights like hell, but sometimes you got to go down. In a phone booth, no one's shiftier than this dude, right? I mean, there are just tight spaces where he's making dudes miss left and right, and it's just insane. And in the tightest of spaces, great pass catcher, right? Really great hands. Obviously, like I said, with all these guys, need to refine their route trees. They weren't asked to run a refined route tree, but really, really good hands. And obviously, after the catch, he's a freak. And the long runs, right? He just looks like he never loses speed. The home run ability is there. Compared to a lot of these guys, right? Like besides TreVeyon Henderson, maybe a lot of these guys will have long runs and kind of get hawked down at the end because they don't have that, ability to have the long runs and continue their speed with longevity. So that's there. The weaknesses, right? I talked a little bit about fighting too hard. You have the questions obviously about how will it translate, right? Because he did play in the Mountain West, but he had a hell of a game against Oregon. Played pretty well against Penn State, who was one of the better defenses in the country. So the concerns aren't as bad, right? And he's going to have better talent when he gets to the NFL too. I think the route tree is there. He needs to improve that a little bit, and then he's just a little undersized, right? 5'9", not the biggest guy, right? Like you would like to see, like Omarion Hampton and Kaleb Johnson, they have the perfect frame, right? 6 foot, 220. Yep. Right, 5'9", not the biggest guy, but that helps him out with the shiftiness, right? Like Mark Ingram was a shorter guy, so I think the concerns with Jeanty, right? Like you're nitpicking, right? You're trying to find things that are the weaknesses, as you should, right? Like everyone can improve on anything, but I saw a chart on Twitter the other day. It was missed tackles forced versus yards after contact. No one was even close to the dude. Top right of the chart. Right, like no one's even close to him. He had like 1,900 yards after contact. The dude just doesn't get tackled. He gets hit at the line of scrimmage because teams know that they're running the ball. They load the box, and then he just takes off. So, he's a top 10 guy for me. I think I'd love to see him in Denver, but Raiders, Bears, Saints, even someone trades up. Like he's going top 10 in my mind.
Yeah, I think he's definitely a top 10 pick. It just wouldn't make sense for him to fall out of it. I guess people are saying there's possible reasons, but the team's just valuing other positions more with the very deep running back class. But it just doesn't make sense. He forced 143 missed tackles, which is a single season record for the college football playoff era, which just is absurd to me. And like you said, Ty, I did see that graph too. He had 0.22 broken tackles per attempt, which is just insane. And he had 4.5 yards after contact per run as well, which is just absurd in comparison to some other guys.
We talked about 4 yards in a cloud of dust, right? Like that gets you a first down. I mean, the dude's doing it after contact. Like that's insane. You know, you hope he's not getting touched within the first 2 yards at least, right? So then he's getting, I mean, he had like over 5 yards of carry. I think he had like 8 yards of carry or something like that. I mean, it was ridiculous what he was doing. He's a blue chip guy, like you said, generational talent. I think he still is a little bit above Hampton, but those two dudes, man, I mean, get them anywhere in the first round on a lot of these teams. I mean, they're gonna be a problem.
Yeah, and I just want to highlight real quick. I did say like I picked the Raiders for him as like I think it's a genuinely perfect fit now that they have Geno Smith as well. They kind of have their quarterback of the future, whatever you want to call that. But then you have a solid, possibly you're looking to possibly add a receiver, right, to get a solid receiver room going. But you have Brock Bowers and I think you need running back more than, because if you get Ashton Jeanty, you could really grind teams down, and then you have Brock Bowers to throw to, and they'll probably draft a receiver as well in one of the later rounds because there's a solid receiver class as well. So I could see him going there or the Saints. I think those are two teams in the top 10 that really I think are the most likely to pick him. I'd rather the Saints go McMillan at 9 if he's available than Jeanty, just because we need running back less than we need a receiver or a number 1 receiver. But I wouldn't mind it at all. And then
I would hope he would end up in Chicago or Denver, right? Like my concern, I think the Raiders is a great fit, right? Like they would be stupid not to take him. Their O-line is terrible, right? Like playing behind that offensive line, like at a higher level, right? Like that is where the how will this translate against better competition comes into play, because he's not even set up for success with his offensive line. So I would like to see him obviously I'd like to see him in Denver, but behind that Chicago offensive line, he would be disgusting. He'd be a Jahmyr Gibbs type player.
Yeah, it would be really scary if he somehow fell to them, and I could see it's definitely possible if the Raiders make a different move, if they go because they could go T-Mac too, and then the Saints could choose someone else. Yeah, or the draft is going to be a lot of fun to break down. We're going to break down the mock draft, things like that closer to the draft. But I'm really excited for it. I think all these running backs are going to be from 1 through 5, all have really good talent. I think they could be something big in the NFL. And then all these other guys could be really good role players down the road. And so there's definitely a lot of like dynasty steals in this running back class for sure. Anyways, that'll do it for our running back draft class episode. I think next week we have linebackers, I want to say, because there's a little bit of a good linebacker class. It's either linebackers or a different defensive position. I'll check. But I'm excited to break those down with you, Ty. We'll see if Hammer's back on. He's on vacation in Florida this week, so he couldn't make it. But we're excited to break those guys down. And then as any breaking news comes out, we'll break that down as well in the episode too. So anyways, you guys know where to check us out on social media at Jenks Island, as well as anywhere you get podcasts at Jenks Island Podcast. And we'll see you guys next week.